Welcome to F1 News Channel Global Formula Pex. McLaren has just recruited the one person who arguably understands better than anyone how to work with Max Verstappen during a race weekend. Gianpiero Lambiase has been the race engineer of Max Verstappen since 2016 at Red Bull Racing. Over that period, their relationship evolved into one of the most successful driver-engineer partnerships in modern Formula One. 4 drivers' world championships, dozens of race wins, and nearly a decade of working side by side made Lambi one of the most important figures inside the Red Bull structure. That is why his decision to leave the team has attracted significant attention across the paddock. Starting in 2028, he will join McLaren as Chief Racing Officer. In this role, he will help oversee the team's race operations and work directly under team principal Andrea Stella. On the surface, this looks like a logical senior recruitment. Any team aiming to stay competitive at the front needs experienced people managing its race operations. But when you look at McLaren's recruitment pattern over the last few years, the story becomes far more interesting. The team has already brought in several key figures from Red Bull, including Rob Marshall in the technical department and Will Courtenay on the strategy side. Now they have added the one person who has been closest to Verstappen inside the Red Bull garage. And that inevitably raises one important question. Is this simply McLaren strengthening their team structure, or could it actually be part of a longer-term strategy that somehow involves Verstappen himself? In this video, we're going to break down all the facts behind Lambiase's move, and why it could have far bigger implications than it first appears. So, if you enjoy deep Formula One analysis like this, make sure to subscribe, because by the end of this video, we'll arrive at one scenario that might explain the real direction behind McLaren's move. What makes this story particularly significant is the scale of Lambiase's influence within Red Bull. Inside the paddock, he is widely known simply as GP, and for nearly a decade, he has been the voice in Verstappen's ear during the most intense moments of a race weekend. The relationship between driver and race engineer is always important in Formula One, but in this case, it evolved into something unusually strong. As one paddock observer put it in discussions about the move, Lambiase had become a huge stalwart inside Red Bull, someone who had been instrumental in championship successes and deeply embedded in Verstappen's career trajectory. From the moment Verstappen arrived at Red Bull in 2016, Lambiase was there guiding the communication between driver, strategy team, and pit wall. Over time, their dynamic became one of the most recognizable on team radio. At times blunt, occasionally tense, but ultimately highly effective. More importantly, it was consistent. Every one of world championships and all of his victories with Red Bull came with Lambiase operating as his race engineer. That continuity matters enormously in modern Formula One. A driver who is fighting for championships needs absolute trust in the voice guiding him through strategy calls, tire management decisions, and the chaos of safety cars and race restarts. And according to those close to the situation, the Verstappen-Lambiase partnership had evolved beyond a simple professional collaboration. As one analysis of the relationship described it, their connection was a friendship rather than just a pure working relationship. They had shared the highs and lows of Red Bull's competitive cycle together. They had gone through difficult seasons when the team was chasing Mercedes, and then the dominant years that followed. So when news emerged that Lambiase would leave Red Bull, the reaction across the paddock was immediate. Not simply because a senior figure was departing, that happens often in Formula One, but because this was arguably the closest ally Verstappen had inside the team structure. And that raises an uncomfortable reality for Red Bull. Over the past year, there has been a steady erosion of key personnel within the organization. Observers inside the paddock point out that since the death of Red Bull co-founder Dietrich Mateschitz at the end of 2022, the team has gradually lost several important figures across different departments. Some departures were expected, others were part of normal competitive movement between teams. But taken together, the pattern has started to form a narrative, one where Red Bull is slowly losing elements of the structure that helped build its dominant era, and Lambiase's exit arguably fits directly into that trend. One commentator described the situation bluntly: the erosion of the people around Max over the last 12 months has been quite significant. From Verstappen's perspective, that matters more than any single technical development or car upgrade. Drivers often talk about loyalty to a team, but in reality, that loyalty is usually directed toward the group of people they work with most closely. And for Verstappen, Lambiase was at the center of that group. That is why some observers believe this moment could represent what one analyst called a big line in the sand. Lamb, after all, had been his closest ally in Red Bull. They had won all their races together, won all their titles together, and been very close through the highs and the lows. When a relationship like that ends, it inevitably raises questions about what comes next. But to understand the full significance of the move, it is equally important to look at it from McLaren's perspective, because from their side, this is not simply a recruitment, it is a strategic addition. Over the last few years, McLaren has quietly been assembling a very experienced leadership group. The arrival of Rob Marshall from Red Bull strengthened the technical department. Will Courtenay was also brought in to add experience on the strategic side of operations, and now Lambiase joins in what has been described as a senior trackside role supporting Andrea Stella. Importantly, the job he will take on at McLaren will not be the same as the race engineer role he held at Red Bull. Instead, he is expected to take on a broader operational responsibility. According to discussions about the appointment, he will effectively act as a senior figure helping run the racing team during Grand Prix weekends, working as a key support figure for Stella. In other words, the move represents a step up in leadership responsibility. Some insiders even believe that in the longer term, Lambiase could develop into a potential team principal candidate. There were already signs that his career might be heading in that direction. Before McLaren secured his signature, several other teams had reportedly shown interest. Aston Martin had considered him as a possible leadership candidate. There were also rumors that Williams had explored the possibility of bringing him into a senior management position, but ultimately it was McLaren who moved first and finalized the deal. And that raises an intriguing point about timing, because when a team begins recruiting senior figures from a rival organization, particularly multiple figures, it rarely happens by coincidence. Instead, it often reflects a deliberate attempt to import knowledge, operational philosophy, and competitive culture. Red Bull's success over the past decade has been built not only on technical innovation, but also on exceptional race execution, strategy calls, pit stop timing, tire management decisions. These elements have consistently been among the strongest in Formula One, and Lamb was a central part of that operational strength. So from McLaren's perspective, the logic behind the recruitment is straightforward. If you want to operate like the most successful team in the sport, one of the fastest ways to do it is by hiring the people who helped build that success. But once again, this is where the Verstappen angle becomes impossible to ignore, because when the closest operational figure to Verstappen leaves Red Bull and joins a rival team, it naturally feeds speculation about the future. No one inside McLaren has suggested that the move is directly connected to any attempt to recruit Verstappen, and there is no concrete evidence that such a plan exists. But Formula One history shows that driver moves are often influenced by the people surrounding them. Engineers move, designers move, senior management changes, and sometimes those shifts gradually create an environment where a driver begins to consider new possibilities. There is also another layer to this story that should not be ignored. During the previous season, Lambiase had to step away from several race weekends due to serious personal matters. By the end of that season, the emotional toll of that period had become visible. Those close to the situation noted that the atmosphere between Verstappen and Lambiase had become particularly emotional as the year concluded. That context matters because while the professional implications of the move are obvious, personal factors are often just as influential in decisions like this. Leaving a team after nearly a decade is never purely a technical or career calculation. There are always human considerations involved, but regardless of the motivations behind the move, the competitive consequences are now unavoidable. Red Bull will have to rebuild part of the operational structure around Verstappen. McLaren, meanwhile, has strengthened its leadership group with someone who has spent years at the very center of championship, winning campaigns, and Verstappen himself is now entering a period where several of the people closest to him inside Red Bull are no longer there. Whether that ultimately changes anything about his future remains uncertain. But in Formula One, moments like this often become turning points in ways that are only obvious in hindsight. So the real question is this: is Gianpiero Lambiase's move simply the next step in his own career? Or could it eventually become the first domino in a much bigger shift involving Max Verstappen himself? Let me know what you think. Do you believe this is just a normal senior recruitment move inside Formula One? Or could McLaren be positioning itself for something much bigger in the future? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see what you think.